So John, if you go back to the early days of the practice groups with all the students that practiced and practiced and practiced days, months and years to form these tools. Mm-hmm. Can you give a sense of the atmosphere at those practice groups? And if people today would like to set up their own practice groups, how do they do it to let excellence come up? Bubble up.
Yeah. The no-nothing state, in my opinion, is key. We didn't have the choice. NLP modeling involves the unconscious assimilation of complex pattern without any intention of understanding what you're doing until you can consistently replicate the same consequences as the source, the genius, from which these patterns originally came. So there were large parts of what we did where at best we had a slight intuitive feel for where to go. What we did have, which I don't think is as well developed in the modern forms of NLP as it was in the origins, was calibration skills. There was a concept in those days called resistance. I think most people who do change work now recognize that resistance is nothing more than a special set of signals, typically nonverbal, voice quality changes, postures, gestures, breathing patterns, physiologies, that the unconscious of the person you're working with is saying, not there, we're not going down that road, or we're not going down there until you make arrangements for us to be able to satisfy the positive intention behind the behavior we wish to change. So in that sense, there were no signal systems in those days. What we had was the ability to calibrate and enough sensitivity to calibration of the nonverbals of the person we're working with to know when to change to something else. So imagine having, in the case of Erickson, for example, this stack, this pile, this disorganized mass of imitative behaviors that we could perform with some competency, and had no idea which pattern should be applied to which piece of this complex encounter somebody undergoing change. So what did we have? All we had was the ability to calibrate, pick an imitative behavior out of the stack, throw it, hurl it at the client, watch the response, listen to the response, separate in all the nonverbal return messages, those messages that were associated in some trivial way with conscious movements, emphasis in the voice, and those that came from a deeper source, namely signals coming directly out of the unconscious. In that sense, resistance was our guide. The unconscious instructed us whether to continue along this path or to find and test in some trial and error mode something else. So the necessity for understanding was not a strong part of what we did. What was necessary was getting the consequences, the results, and within the ethical boundaries we established at that point intuitively, which have become somewhat more refined. There's still lots of questions there. Within those ethical boundaries, we did whatever necessary. When you read this book, you'll discover that there's very few, quote, failures. And so it's legitimate to ask the question, well, did you guys ever blow it? Did you ever mess it up? And the answer was, yeah, with a qualification. If Bo and I, he's playing bass and I'm playing keyboard, and we've got a singer here who's working with us, we're chugging along, doing a nice piece of music, and suddenly one of us, the singer, or the keyboard player, or the bass player, suddenly offers a new riff, a new sequence in the music. This will energize and catch the attention immediately of the other two members of the trio. The only real mistake you could make in such a context is to stop. We never stopped. There was always another way of approaching what wasn't working. So this impression that you get out of these stories in here is accurate in the sense that in almost no cases did we ever stop before we got what we went after. Now, we were not elegant, we were not precise, we used a great deal of trial and error, And the trick, which now becomes explicit in the new code, is our state. We acted as if we knew what we were about. We acted as if we knew what we were doing. We used calibration to decide whether to continue or to switch tracks and try some other trial and error method. So that kind of spirit of pure exploration, I wonder what will happen if, was absolutely a theme that connected, that wove together these strange and unusual experiences we would use. You can read in here or in Whispering about the discovery of representation systems. And there is a very simple example of how not exactly knowing what we were doing, but having a couple of examples and then generating other examples which intuitively fit into the same set, led us to experiment without knowing what we were doing in the world, to the point where things began to resolve, and suddenly we recognized the clarity of the association between the preferred or activated at the moment representational system, the eye movements which indicated which one it was, and the choice of predicates at the unconscious level which reinforced, if you wish to dignify it, the diagnosis.
You often also say that you and Frank and Richard had very good rapport.
Deep
Rapport. What were their qualities, so the qualities of Frank and Richard, that also contributed to the emergence of this field that we know NLP?
Fearlessness. They refused to accept failure. They had each in their own way, Frank in Vietnam, Richard with other experiences in his personal history, had been in contexts where their well-being, physical safety depended upon the ability to act as if. I mean, if you've been through those kinds of experiences and now you're standing in front of 200 people and doing a demonstration about fast phobia cure or something, what's the downside? You look out there, you don't see any machine guns. You don't see anybody pulling a pin on a grenade. So, I mean, how much risk is there? And I think the one thing that is clear the three of us shared was a certain audacity. We were unwilling to accept failure. That's how we kept playing until we found the right groove and the improvisation. And at the same time, there was little or no trembling of the state we were operating out of, because compared to other experiences in our personal history, what's the worst that can happen? And it was an acceptable worst case. And so we pushed on through. And blind in some cases, deaf in others, and sometimes with great clarity and purpose, but always using calibration as a guide.
So when you guys went different ways, how did you take NLP on your life after the roaring 70s? Yeah. How did you take it on for yourself?
The splitting of the ways happened in two phases. One, Frank went off in a different direction, into San Diego and on to Oklahoma, to establish his own study groups.
Yeah.
Continued to pursue the patterning in that way. You can read about the circumstances under which that occurred. Richard and I, again, it was a division of interests. He was interested in a class of events which I didn't find particularly attractive, and vice versa.
Yeah.
He thought I was, for example, crazy. Maybe there's some justification to this, but in any case, he was convinced I was crazy because I was a rock climber. And he wouldn't subject himself to that, even though it wasn't a question of fear, it was a question of, why are you doing something like that?
Yeah.
So, and similarly, he had certain interests which I myself. So it was a natural, the three of us were like the Three Musketeers. I absolutely trusted these guys in the context in which we were operating. And this trust gave us enormous flexibility. I remember the Hilton Hotel in downtown Chicago, Richard and I with a couple hundred people on stage, opening frame, somebody raises their hand and they went, fast phobia cure, blah, 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 this is amazing. Would you do a demonstration? And I stepped forward quickly and grabbed the attention. I went, interesting you asked this. My partner here, Bandler, brilliant man, has come up with a format for phobia cure, which doesn't involve any of the elements of fast phobia cure that you're aware of in the world. It's even faster than the fast phobia cure, and what an opportunity. Richard, show him your new format. This is all nonsense. There was no such new format. This put Richard on the spot of having to create something. This was not an asymmetric relationship. This happened, he would step forward and put me in these impossible situations. Even to that degree, I trusted both myself and my partners to create contexts where we would force each other to create something absolutely new on the spot. I don't see and hear that happening much anymore.
Yeah.
So I think those are the kinds of qualities, a certain playfulness, ability to maintain state under what other people considered high-pressure situations, which didn't seem to us at the time to be high-pressure situations, given the personal histories we three brought to